So the name of the game now is how can the Jaguars get where the Lions are? The Lions are heading to the NFC Championship game and getting closer and closer to possibly a Super Bowl appearance, right? The Lions have been everybody's favorite underdogs this season, while the Jaguars, on the other hand, looked like they had it all together, and now there are a whole lot of questions that have to be answered over the course of the offseason. Now, I could be here all day as we talk about how the Lions built their team and the Jaguars built their team. But for the Jaguars, getting to where the Detroit Lions are going ultimately starts right now as they start with a search for their new defensive coordinator. Now, right now, the Jaguars have about 7 different guys that are in the running for this job that they've interviewed or requested interviews for. Many of them have been there, done that. Some of them are inexperienced and haven't been defensive coordinators before, but I think after going the Mike Caldwell route, the inexperienced defensive coordinator, Doug Peterson's going to favor a guy who's been a defensive coordinator and has engineered a defense before. So let's go through a couple of the top candidates, why don't we? Let's start off with a guy who has been around the NFL that his name rings some bells, Wink Martindale. Now, he left his job with the Giants, maybe not under the best of circumstances. Him and Giants head coach Brian Daboll clearly not on the same page. Wink wanted out, so he just left. And now he's looking for a new team. Wink is an experienced defensive coordinator. He was a defensive coordinator with the Giants. Before that, defensive coordinator with the Ravens. He's been there, done that, and he's put out some very exotic defenses. And if you like a defense that is going to send the house at the quarterback, this is the guy for you. Now, Wink Martindale is known for some of those exotic blitzes that can confuse quarterbacks, keep their eyes looking all over the field. That's what this guy does for a living. Now, the part of that is it also forces turnovers, but the other part of that, he gives up a lot of yards in his defenses. So there's definitely some pros and cons to a Wink Martindale defense. We'll see if Wink is ultimately the guy that comes here to Jacksonville. There are a couple of guys on the list that we'll talk about that I'm a little bit more in favor of than Wink. I like Ryan Nielsen. He was the Falcons defensive coordinator last year. First time being a DC in the NFL with Atlanta, a team not filled with defensive talent, but he did a really good job with that defense last year. Their defense was more than serviceable. Now, he started in the NFL as a defensive line coach with the New Orleans Saints. He's known as a teacher. He was also a defensive line coach before that at NC State. Ryan Nielsen has been hands-on with those defensive line guys. And if you watch the Jags last year, you know their defensive line could maybe use just a little bit of a boost. And that's what this guy's known for doing. Now, the one drawback to maybe a Ryan Nielsen defense is he played maybe the most man coverage of any defense in the NFL last year, calling the shots in Atlanta. Now, the Jaguars played a whole lot of zone coverage and don't necessarily have the personnel that is cut out to play a ton of man coverage right now. Now, could they change some things and make it work? Possibly, but that would take a little bit of change into things here in Jacksonville. We'll see if maybe he can adjust his play calling if he comes here. But Ryan Nielsen is a guy that I think is toward the top of the list. He's been there, done that. He's an up-and-coming guy. He's known as a teacher, and he does have experience and did some good things with Atlanta. I think him coming to Jacksonville, bringing his scheme with the pieces the Jags already have would be a match made in heaven. But how about the dark horse candidate for this job? Guy that's not in the NFL, Jesse Minter. He was a Michigan Wolverines defensive coordinator. He's on that Jim Harbaugh staff that just won a national championship. So he's definitely going to bring a trophy with him. He had Michigan's defense playing out of their minds this season. They had #1 total defense in the country. So that Michigan Wolverines group, definitely a group that played well under Jesse Minter's tutorship. Now, he's only been there for a couple of years leading the way, but he's done a good job in both years as his defensive coordinator. Now, one of the few drawbacks for this guy's resume is he's never been a defensive coordinator in the NFL. He was on the Ravens staff prior to joining Michigan, but he's never done it as a DC in the NFL. So this is definitely something that would be a first for him, but when you look at how he's transitioned into being a defensive coordinator with Michigan, you like a lot of the things that you've seen out there on the field. And if you've been watching the playoffs, maybe you've watched the Ravens defense that's been flying around out there. Well, the guy that was leading that Michigan defense before Minter got there, Mike Macdonald, he's the one calling the shots over there in Baltimore. He's on the short list for some head coaching jobs. Mike Macdonald was the Michigan defensive coordinator before Jesse, and now Jesse's the DC. Maybe follow a similar path, jump back to the NFL as a defensive coordinator. Jesse's the dark horse for the job. There are reports out there that if he decides to make the jump to the NFL, he could definitely have this Jaguars job. It is definitely an interesting conversation to be had, and he's had some success at that college level. The Jaguars have to get this defensive coordinator hire right. There is no way around it. Right now, there's a window that is about this wide open. They have some talent. They got a lot of moves that they have to make, but it all starts with hiring the right defensive coordinator who can move those pieces around. I think one of the drawbacks for Mike Caldwell was he was a little too married to the scheme of what he wanted to do. This is how we play, and didn't want to adjust as much. A guy like Minter is very flexible in what he likes to do out there on the field based on the personnel that he has, and can throw a whole lot of different looks. I think it would make Jacksonville's team look a whole lot different when they get out on the field next fall. We'll see what the Jaguars ultimately decide to do. This search will probably stretch on at least another week or so, as the Jaguars definitely look under every rock and make sure that they have exhausted all of their resources, because they know that this is an important hire. We'll see what they ultimately decide to do, and then we'll talk all about it right here on the Sunday Sports Zone.